It is although known that two such dissimilar people as Miss Rayleigh and Major Pennyman should have been stuck in the same man. तो मेजर पेनीमैन और मिस रेली दोनों ने बोला था कुछ ऑड लग रहा था इस बार जब गए थे. Right. Just then Mr. Coleman came bustling in. Bustling was just the word for it. If his tongue had hung out, he had suddenly produced a tail to wag, you wouldn't have been surprised. मतलब मिस्टर कोलमैन जो थे उस लड़की के पीछे पागल थे. वो जो थी ना मिस रेली.
अपनी बीवी के पीछे.
नहीं, वो उसकी मिस्टर रेली की लड़की.
अच्छा.
Hello, 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 he said. Absolutely the world's best shopper, that's me. Have you shown nurse all the beauties of the town? She wasn't impressed, said Miss Reilly dryly. I don't blame her, said Mr. Coleman heartily. Of all the one horse tumble down places. Not a lover of picturesque or the antique, are you, Bill? I can't think of why you are an archaeologist. उसने बोला archaeologist को उसने बोला कि भाई मेरे को जो था ले लिया था. You're absurd, said Miss Tilly. She sounded quite angry. Oh, I realize it's quite of the question, said Mr. Coleman cheerfully. So if I've got to do something, I don't care what it is so long as it isn't mugging in an office all day long. I was quite agreeable to seeing a bit of the world. Here goes, I said, and along I came. उसको पूरी दुनिया देखनी थी. कोलमैन को इसलिए आर्कियोलॉजी बना, उसको ऑफिस में नहीं बैठना था. बेसिकली ये था. And a fat and a fat lot of use you must be, I expect. There you're wrong. I can stand up on the deck and shout, Ya Allah with anybody. हाँ कोई बात नहीं. मैं तो किसी के साथ डिक पे कह सकता हूँ या अल्लाह. And as a matter of fact, I'm not so dusty at drawing. और ड्राइंग में भी काफ़ी ठीक ठाक हूँ. Imitating handwriting used to be my specialty at school. मैं स्कूल में ना हैंडराइटिंग कॉपी करता था, तो यहाँ पे भी मैं ड्राइंग में काफ़ी अच्छा हूँ. I made a, I'd made a first class forger. Oh well, I may come to that yet. If my Rolls Royce splashes you with mud as you're waiting for a bus, you'll know that I've taken to crime. Miss Rayleigh said, don't you think it's about time you started instead of talking so much? Miss Rayleigh, ना तुम बोलना बंद करो, तुम जाओ. Hospital bill, aren't we, nurse? है ना? I'm sure Nurse Lathan is anxious to get settled in. You're always sure of something, retorted Mr. Coleman with a grin. That was true enough, I thought. Cocksure little Mix. No, is it? वो मिस रेली कुछ ज़्यादा ही शानी है मतलब. I said dryly, perhaps we'd better start, Mr. Coleman. Right you are, nurse. I shook hands with Miss Rayleigh and thanked her, and we set off. Damned attractive girl, Sheila, said Mr. Coleman, but always taking a fellow off. ये जो है शीला बड़ी सुंदर लड़की है, कोलमन बोला, पर तीखी है. We drove out of the town and presently took a kind of a track between green crops. It was very bumpy and full of ruts. After about half an hour, Mr. Coleman pointed to a big mound by the river bank ahead of us and said, Tell Yarimja. Bolo Yarimja. I could see little black figures moving about like ants. And as I was looking, they suddenly began to run all together down the side of the mound. Fido, said Mr. Coleman, knocking off time. We knock off an hour before sunset. The expedition house lay a little way back from the river. River के पास जो था expedition house था. The driver rounded a corner, bumped through an extremely narrow arc as they were. The house was built around a courtyard. हाँ घर जो था एक courtyard पे था. अम्मा ये देखो इस तरीके का courtyard था. ये देख लो उसके चारों ओर rooms हैं. ये ठीक है ना. मतलब एक वो था उसकी तरह. Originally, it had occupied only the south side of the courtyard, with a few unimportant outbuildings in the east. The expedition had continued the building the other two sides. तो इसमें सबके थे Carey, Coleman, Writer, Emmott, Carey, kitchen, photographic room, laboratory, art entrance, drawing office, bathroom, Mr. Mercado, Mrs. Mercado, Miss Johnson, Nurse Litherin, Dr. Lidner, Mrs. Lidner, Antica room, living room, portico, dining room, office, father's this thing. ये है कोर्टयार्ड का, ये है इसका मैप. ठीक है ना, ये देख लो. हाँ, all the rooms opened on the courtyard and most of the windows, the exception being in the original south where there were windows giving on the outside country as well. These windows, however, were barred on the outside. In the southwest corner, a staircase ran up the long flat roof with a parapet running the length of the south side of the building, which was higher than the other three sides. Mr. Coleman led me along the east side of the courtyard and round to where a big open veranda occupied the center of the south side. He pushed open a door at one side of it, and we entered a room where several people were sitting round a tea table. Toodle oodle oo, said Mr. Coleman. Here's Sari Gamp. The lady who was sitting at the head of the table rose and came to greet me. I had the first glimpse of Louis Lardner. Louis Lardner के बारे में पहला हुआ. अब ये तीसरा चैप्टर टेल यारिन जा. अब लुई लार्डनर से बात है. अब ये तीसरा चैप्टर आ गया.
Bilangnya kalau lagi.
उसकी वाइफ ऐसा लेना जो पागल है या जनरली उसको रिस्क है. अभी देखो क्या होता है. I don't mind admitting that my first impression on seeing Mrs. Lerner was one of downright surprise. मैं एकदम चटपटा आ गई. One gets into the way of imagining a person when one hears them talked about. I'd got it firmly into my head that Mrs. Lerner was a dark, discontented kind of woman. एक dark सी discontented kinds of औरत होगी. मतलब एक dark, discontented kind of woman होगी. The nervy kind all on the edge. And then too I'd expected her to be, well, to put it frankly, a bit vulgar. मतलब उसने सोचा कि बहुत ही गंदी सी एक औरत होगी, काली सी, thick skinned, वैसी. She wasn't a bit like what I'd imagined her. To begin with, she was very fair. बहुत गोरी थी. She wasn't a sweet like her husband, but she might have been as far as looks went. ठीक है ना? She had that blonde Scandinavian fairness that you don't very often see. She wasn't a young woman, midway between 30 and 40, I should say. Her face was rather haggard, and there was some grey hair mingled with fairness. थोड़े से सफ़ेद बाल थे, fair थी. Her eyes though were lovely. आंखें बड़ी सुंदर थी. They were the only eyes I'd ever come across that you might truly come as violet. पूरी violet eyes थी उसकी. They were very large and there were faint shadows underneath them. बड़ी बड़ी आंखें थी, कुछ faint shadows थी उनके underneath. She was very thin and fragile looking, and if I say, she had an air of intense weariness and was at the same time very much alive. ऐसा लग रहा था बहुत थकी मांदी सी हो, पर ऐसा भी था कि जिंदा दिल भी है. It sounds like nonsense, but that's the feeling I got. I felt too that she was a lady through and through, and that means something even nowadays. She put out her hand and smiled. उन्होंने अपना हाथ दिया और हंसी. Smile. Her voice was low and soft with an American drawl on it. Typical American accent. I'm so glad you've come, nurse. Will you have some tea? Or would you like to go into your room first? आपको चाय चाहिए? आप पहले अपने रूम में जाएंगी. I said I'd have tea and she introduced me to the people sitting round the table. This is Miss Johnson and Mr. Reiter, Mrs. Mercado, Mr. Emmett, Father Levigne. My husband will be in presently. Sit down here between Father Levigne and Miss Johnson. Father Levigne and Miss Johnson के बीच में बैठा. I did as I was bid, and Miss Johnson began talking to me, asking about my journey. Miss Johnson ने बात करनी शुरू की. ये journey. I liked her. She reminded me of a matron I'd had in my probationary days, whom we had all admired and worked hard for. She was getting on for 50, I should judge. Mrs. Johnson जो थी करीब 50 के होने वाली थी, and rather mannish in appearance with iron grey hair cropped short. She had an abrupt, pleasant voice, rather deep in tone. She had an ugly, rugged face with an almost laughably turned-up nose, but she was in the habit of rubbing irritably when anything troubled or perplexed her. She wore a tweed coat and skirt made rather like a man's. She told me presently that she was a native of Yorkshire. वो Yorkshire की थी. Father Levigne I found out just a bit alarming. He was a tall man with a great black beard and pince nez. Father Levigne की बड़ी सी beard थी और मतलब बड़ी सी वो थी. I had heard Mrs. Kelsey say that there was a French monk there, and I now saw that Father Levigne was wearing a monk's robe of some white woodland material. तो मिस्टर लेविग्नी थे फ्रेंच monks थे. It surprised me rather because I always understood that monks went into monasteries and didn't come out again. तो मामा बेसिकली क्या मिला उसको, एक तो मिस जॉनसन मिली वहाँ पे। मिस जॉनसन थी 40 और 50 की उम्र की थी, ठीक है ना, फेयर, पैसा, थोड़ी मैनलिश थी। फिर मिसेस लाइडनर मिली। मिसेस लाइडनर, उसने देखा कि बहुत फेयर है, उनके थोड़े से हल्के के बाल है, अलाइव है, पर ऐसा लगा बहुत थकी मांदी सी है। फिर उनको फादर लिविंगनी मिले जो कि एक फ्रेंच प्रीस्ट है, उन्हें वाइस का वो पहना था। Mrs. Mrs. Leidner talked to him mostly in French, but he spoke to me in quite fair English. I noticed that he had shrewd, observant eyes which darted about from face to face. तो मिस्टर लाइडनर की आंखें बड़ी तेज थी, वो एक चेहरे से दूसरे चेहरे पे जा रहे थे। मिसेस लाइडनर जो थी वो फादर लिविंगनी से फ्रेंच में बात कर रही थी। Opposite me were the other three. Mr. Reiter was a stout, fair young man with glasses. His hair was rather long and curly, and he had very round blue eyes. I think I should think he must have been a lovely baby, but he wasn't much to look matlab, at now. In fact, he was just like a little pig. मतलब मिस्टर राइटर जो थे अजीब से लग रहे थे, शॉर्ट स्टाउट वगैरह, ठीक है ना, वो सुअर की तरह थे। The other young man had a very short hair cropped close to his head. He had a long, rather humorous face and very good teeth, and he looked very attractive when he smiled. एक आदमी था जो कि बड़े दांत थे, बहुत स्मॉल था, तो बहुत अट्रैक्टिव लगता था। He said very little, though he just nodded if spoken to or answered in monosyllables. He, like Mr. Reiter, was an American. वो भी एक अमेरिकन था जो आदमी था। The last person was Mrs. Mercado, and I couldn't have a good look at her because whenever I glanced in her direction, I always found her staring at me with a kind of hungry stare that was a bit disconcerting to say the least. तो मिसेस मर्कादो की तरफ वो ज़्यादा नहीं बता पाई, क्योंकि जब भी वो मिसेस मर्कादो को देखती थी, मिसेस मर्कादो उसको घूर के देख रही थी। You might have thought a hospital nurse was a strange animal the way she was looking at me. No manners at all. She was quite young, not more than 25. Young थी, 25 से ज़्यादा की नहीं थी, and a sort of dark and slinky looking, if you know what I mean. Quite nice looking in a kind of way, but rather as though she might have been as my mother used to call, a touch of the tar brush. समझ रही है मामा? She had on a very vivid pullover and her nails matched it in color. She had a thin bird-like eager face with big eyes and rather tight and suspicious mouth. ऐसी थी मामा, ऐसी थी माँ, देखो ऐसी थी मिसेस मर्कालो. The tea was very good, a nice strong blend, not like the weak China stuff that Mrs. Kelsey always had, and that had been a sore trial to me. There was toast and jam and a plate of rock buns and a cutting cake. Mr. Emmett was very polite in passing me things, quite as he was always seemed to notice when my plate was empty. Presently, Mr. Coleman bustled in and took the place beyond Miss Johnson. There didn't seem to be anything the matter with his nerves. He talked away 19 to dozen. Mrs. Leidner sighed once and cast a wearied look in his direction, but it didn't have any effect. Nor did the fact that Mrs. Mercado, to whom he was addressing most of his conversation, was far too busy watching me to do more than perfectly replies. मिस्टर कॉल्डमैन जो थे वो मिसेस मर्काडो को बार बार बोल रहे थे, मिसेस मर्काडो उसकी तरफ देख भी नहीं रही थी, वो बस इसकी तरफ देख रहे थे. Just as we were finishing, Dr. Leidner and Mr. Mercado came in from the dig. Dr. Leidner greeted me in a nice kind of manner. I saw his eyes go quickly and anxiously to his wife's face, and he seemed to be relieved by what he saw there. मिस्टर लाइडनर ने अपनी बीवी को तरफ देखा, और जैसे ही उन्होंने अपनी बीवी की तरफ देखा, he was happy that जो कि उनको दिख रहा था. Then he sat down at the other end of the table and Mr. Mercado sat down in the vacant place by Mrs. Leidner. Mrs. Leidner के साथ जो था मिस्टर मर्काडो बैठ गए, और मिस्टर लाइडनर और डॉक्टर लाइडनर जो थे वो हेड द टेबल पे बैठ गए. He was a tall, thin, melancholy man, a good deal older than his wife, with a sallow complexion and a queer, soft, shapeless looking beard. I was glad when he came in, for his wife stopped staring at me and transferred her attention to him. तो मिसेस गार्डन मर्कादो ने उसको देखना बंद किया और फिर इसको अपने हस्बैंड को देखा. That I found rather odd. He himself stirred his treat dreamily and said nothing at all. A piece of cake lay untasted on his plate. There was still one vacant place, and presently the door opened and a man came in. The moment I saw Richard Carey, I felt he was one of the handsomest men I'd seen for a long time. Richard Carey, bada hi handsome. And yet I doubt if it were really so. To say a man is handsome at the same time to say he looks like a death's head sounds a rather crank contradiction, but yet it was true. His head gave the effect of having the skin stretched unusually tight over the bones. But they were beautiful bones. The lean line of the jaw, temple, and forehead was so sharply outlined that he reminded me of a bronze statue. है ना? Out of this lean brown face looked two of the brightest and most intensely blue eyes I've ever seen. He stood about 6 foot and was, I should imagine, a little under 40 years of age. Dr. Lalina said, "This is Mr. Carey, our architect nurse." He murmured something in pleasant, inaudible English voice and sat down by Mrs. Mercado. Mrs. Ladner said, "I'm afraid the tea is a bit cold, Mr. Carey." He said, "Oh, that's quite all right, Mrs. Ladner. My fault for being late. I wanted to finish plotting those walls." Mrs. Mercado said, "Jam, Mr. Carey." Mr. Writer pushed forward the toast, and I remember Major Pennyman saying, "I can explain best what I mean by saying that they all pass the butter to each other too politely." Yet there was something little odd about it, a shade formal. You would have such a party of strangers, not people who had known each other, some of them for quite a number of years. और कल पढ़ेंगे, ठीक है?